Hey, what's up guys, it's your boy Urquhart, aka the Gunsmith, and today I'm going to tell you guys about my trip to the UK. This was my first time in the United Kingdom, and I went there with my wife and we spent a week there. We actually went to the UK right after India, so we had to spend a week in Delhi, and some of you guys might have seen my week in Delhi video. I was going back to Delhi after 15 years, so that was a very epic and emotional experience for me. So hopefully some of you guys saw that video and liked it. But after that, we went to the UK, and this was my first time ever in the UK, so I had to do this vlog for you guys. We decided to check out London and Edinburgh, and also lots of castles in Scotland and Loch Ness, and we saw all these beautiful ancient structures and landmarks. So I thought, you know, this absolutely has to be done in a documentary style vlog. So I'm gonna have some commentary in the video for you guys where I tell you a little bit about every place that we went to. We'll also check out some restaurants and just some random things that we did, like shooting a Harry Potter music video while we were in the UK. So let's get started. So the first thing that we did was, well, we flew out from Delhi, but we actually had a layover in Frankfurt, Germany first. We checked out the airport there, about 3 to 4 hours that we had to kill, and it's a bit of an older airport. It's not sleek and stylish like Delhi, Indira Gandhi Airport or Heathrow in London. I used the time that we had to kill to actually work on some video editing, and I was working on my rapper impressions video that some of you guys might have seen. I try to use all the time I have to do these videos, and after that we finally went to London. We arrived there around noon or so, and I really like Heathrow Airport. The airport is pretty old and quite huge, but I like the way that they've maintained it. It's clean and it's a really world-class place. After we landed at Heathrow, we were pretty hungry because the airplane food wasn't that great, so we went to a cafe called Caffe Nero. We had never heard of this place before, but what an amazing cafe. I really liked the kind of sandwiches and wraps and various pre-prepared meals that they had to offer, and the drinks were awesome too. If you're in the UK, you'll see these Caffe Neros everywhere, and they're actually really good cafe. So the plan was to arrive at Heathrow in London and then drive all the way up to Scotland to Edinburgh. So a bit of a crazy plan because we're just coming from India. So obviously being in North America, I'm used to the steering wheel being on the left side and driving on the right side of the road. But on the UK, it's all flipped. So your steering wheel's on the right and you're driving on the left side of the road, and it's very disorienting and confusing if you've never driven that way. But you know what, I thought it's a challenge, and why don't we try it out? And of course there's all these roundabouts that you have to worry about as well. So we took a shuttle from Heathrow, we went to Avis and we rented a car, and the car that we had booked, we didn't get that one. They gave us a quote-unquote free upgrade to a larger car, Ford Mondeo. So we were expecting a slightly smaller car, but we got this large family-size hatchback car, and I was a little bit intimidated looking at this car because I know that the UK has slightly narrower roads than North America, and I've never driven there, never driven on that side of the road, and here I have to drive a large car through the UK all the way up to Scotland. So that was a little bit daunting, but I was like, you know what man, I can do this for sure. I'm gonna give it my best shot. So I tried to stay positive and stay focused. We started the drive, and you know, as soon as we got out of the rental place, there's roundabouts and roundabouts after roundabouts, and I was like, yo, this is so confusing, because if you guys have never gone into a roundabout, you have to be in the correct lane before you get into the roundabout, or you're basically gonna miss your exit, or you're gonna have a very difficult time changing lanes within the roundabout. So you really have to follow your GPS if you're new to the area and know beforehand which lane you need to be in. You have to be very careful and wait for the other drivers sometimes. So after driving for a bit on the highway in the UK and getting used to the roundabouts, I was starting to get a handle on driving over there, even though it was completely mirrored from what you do over here. It's sort of like if you've ever played Mario Kart and you get to the mirror courses and everything is flipped. It was a bit like that. In a couple of hours we stopped for dinner. There's a little town a couple of hours north of London called Stafford. We went to an Indian restaurant there called Narvana, and this was a pretty decent place. We got some dal or lentil soup, and we got some vegetable biryani. Nice hearty meal, and provided the fuel needed for the rest of the drive, because we still had about 4 hours to go, and it was already about 6 p.m. and we really had to hustle and get going so that we don't get there too late. We hit the road again. Actually, the drive was quite scenic and peaceful. It was nice to check out the English countryside. It's a little bit plain, I guess, but when you get closer to Scotland, you start seeing some of the hills. So very beautiful. It did start to get a little bit darker, and it did start to rain as we got closer and closer to Scotland. So that was a little scary because this was still my first drive in the UK, and now it's raining and it's low visibility, but it was an interesting challenge. When we did get to Scotland, it actually got pitch black. I didn't get any footage there because, you know, I was actually really scared. The streets got really narrow near Edinburgh, and we're driving through these little villages and towns and low visibility, not a lot of street lights, so that was really tricky. So I really wish that we had left a little bit earlier, because then we get to enjoy some more of the natural beauty of Scotland, and driving at night just wasn't the same. But we did eventually get to our destination safe and sound, almost midnight when we finally got to our hotel. But at night, couldn't really appreciate the look of it, so we pretty much just crashed. Day 2, we got to properly check out the hotel, Macdonald Houstoun House. This is a 16th century tower house that's been turned into a hotel, and it's an all stone construction. The plumbing in the place is very ancient, so it was a little bit of a struggle working the faucets, because they have different faucets for hot and cold, which was a bit annoying, but also a bit charming, because this is how people did things back in the day. And the view from the window was quite serene, and there's a lot of greenery all around it. So I did like the hotel, but if you prefer places that are fancy or more modern or upscale, then it may not be the right kind of hotel for that. It's a nice hotel if you prefer something rustic and quaint. After that, we began our drive to Edinburgh. So Macdonald Houstoun House is only about half an hour away from Edinburgh, so that drive wasn't too bad. And on the way, we actually finally got to see Scotland. I've always wanted to come to Scotland since I was little. This is when the feeling finally hit that, hey, I'm in Scotland. So we made our way to Edinburgh, and as we approached the city, the traffic just got worse and worse. We saw just thousands and thousands of tourists and tour buses, and we realized how packed this place can get, especially on a Sunday. First thing you notice when you get to the city is it's just something out of the old world. You see all these old historic buildings, Edinburgh Castle sitting on top of a hill, and it's visible from all around the city. So you just feel like you just traveled back in time into medieval times. Just such a gorgeous city to visit. Now, Edinburgh is actually very, very old. I'm talking about 7th century AD is when people first started living in this area. Edinburgh is the capital of Scotland, and almost 500,000 people live here, and it's the most visited city in the UK after London. Edinburgh Castle is the historic fortress that's located on Castle Rock, and there was a royal residence at this castle for many, many centuries, but from the 17th century onwards it was used more as a military barracks, and today obviously it's more of a tourist attraction. It attracts over 1 million visitors every year. Edinburgh Castle is also one of the most attacked castles in history. It's been besieged many, many times and taken over. Now, I really wanted to see this castle, and it was nice to see it in all its glory sitting on top of this hill. And it's such a beautiful and majestic castle. After that, we decided to walk around a bit, and we walked down the Royal Mile, which is actually a collection of streets in the old part of town. Back in the day, this is where a lot of the traffic used to go through. Carts and merchants used to use this road, but today it's more of a tourist attraction. It's got a lot of pubs, restaurants, shops, and collectibles being sold. Now, Royal Mile was especially crowded, even compared to the rest of Edinburgh. And when we were walking there, that's when we finally realized what was going on. And it's something called a Fringe Festival, which is the largest arts festival in the world. It consists of theater, musicals, comedy, circus routines, you name it. There's all kinds of artistic performances going on at this festival. In fact, there's over 3,000 different types of shows that take place at every Fringe Festival. So that's why it was such a huge crowd that day, and while walking around, we did get to see some very talented performers doing their thing. On the Royal Mile, we also saw the St. Giles Cathedral, which is almost 900 years old, and it's one of Edinburgh's major religious sites. As we walked further on the Royal Mile, we passed by the Edinburgh City Chambers. This is where the City Council has its meetings, and in the courtyard there's a statue of Alexander and Bucephalus, so basically Alexander taming his horse, and this is a beautiful statue, and it's done by a popular Scottish sculptor known as John Steele. We also walked by the Elephant House, which is the cafe where J.K. Rowling wrote the first Harry Potter novel. J.K. Rowling actually used to live in Edinburgh for a part of her life, and it's cool to see the place where Harry Potter was conceived. Now, we were having a lot of fun walking around, and we didn't want to check out the castle just yet, so we decided to go for lunch. We saw this really interesting looking tavern right on the Royal Mile known as Deacon Brodie'S Tavern. Now, who's Deacon Brodie? He was actually an Edinburgh city councillor who also happened to be a thief and a gambler. So he actually used to rob and steal in order to fund his gambling habit, but he maintained this double life as a city councillor. and he was actually the inspiration for Jekyll and Hyde because of his dual personality. I love the entrance to this place because it evokes the feeling of a palatial garden because it's got some ornate golden designs, arches, and flowers. Now this tavern was incredibly busy because of the vast amount of people that were there for the Fringe Festival, so it did take a while for us to be served, but the staff was friendly and they were doing their best to keep up with the traffic. So to start off, I tried this drink called the KOPPARBERG alcohol-free cider with strawberry and lime. So I liked how the flavors of apple, strawberry, and lime came together, and it created a refreshing drink which was tangy, sweet, and citrusy at the same time, and it had that hint of bitterness as well. Then we ordered the nachos, which actually came in a bowl, which was very different. Came with the standard guacamole, sour cream, and salsa, and the guacamole was nice and fresh. The sour cream was creamy and smooth, and it hit the spot because we were pretty hungry. We also ordered the French fries, also known as chips in England. These chips were perfectly cooked. They were crispy and light, and on the inside they were just nice and pillowy, so I just loved how the chips tasted. Then we got the mac and cheese, which came with garlic bread. The macaroni was perfectly cooked and the sauce was creamy and thick, and it wasn't too runny. The dish had a rich flavor with just the right amount of saltiness, and the garlic bread was toasty and soft, and there was also a little bit of garnishing on the mac and cheese, which was appreciated. So I would recommend Deacon Brodie's Tavern, but it took us almost 2 hours to eat over there, so that was a little bit of a waste of time considering we had so much planned that day. Right after we got out of the tavern, we rushed to the castle to try to get in, but to our great disappointment, they were not letting any more people in because it was around 5 o'clock. And the thing about the UK is everything shuts early. People were starting to leave from the castle area and we were not allowed in, so that really sucked. But we got some really nice views of the castle from all around, so it wasn't too bad. Because I guess when you're in the castle, you probably can't see how magnificent it is anyway, so I'm just trying to make myself feel better. On the street we saw this busker called Tom Ward, and he's an amazing guitarist. This guy is actually from Australia, and he was also on Australia's Got Talent, and his YouTube video has millions of views. Just the things he can do with the guitar are just ridiculous. So we stood there for a while listening to his playing, and it's just so calming and serene to check it out, and it really fit the whole Edinburgh vibe, and I can see why this guy's part of the Fringe Festival because he was a really world-class guitarist. There were also some cool circus performers sitting one on top of each other, balanced on some spheres, and I just don't know how they were doing it. Being incredibly still and somehow managed to balance this sort of formation was just crazy. There's so many talented people at this festival that it's definitely worth going back to check out. We also passed by a beautiful Gothic building known as the Hub or Tolbooth Kirk. This was built back in 1845 and was initially used as a church, but now it's used as an information center for the arts festivals that happen in Edinburgh, like the Edinburgh Arts Festival and the Fringe Festival. This building is over 200 feet tall and it's the highest point in central Edinburgh. After that, we passed by the Princess Street Gardens. This is the largest park in all of Edinburgh, and it's right in the shadow of the Edinburgh Castle. There are several statues in the park that you can check out. Some of them are also by John Steele, the sculptor I mentioned before. There's also a really intricate botanical arrangement that's dedicated to the Royal Incorporation of Architects of Scotland. Right in front of the Princess Street Gardens, there's also a Ferris wheel that you can go on to enjoy more views of this beautiful city. And next to that is something known as the Scott Monument. This is a tall and imposing Gothic structure dedicated to an author known as Walter Scott. If you haven't heard of Walter Scott, he's known for some classic medieval novels like Ivanhoe. And this whole monument is dedicated to him. It's over 200 feet tall, which makes it the tallest monument dedicated to a writer in the whole world. There are actually characters from his novels sculpted right on the monument, and right at the bottom of it is a sculpture of Walter Scott himself, and this is also done by John Steele. At that point, it was starting to get dark, and it was also starting to get a little bit rainy, so we decided to head back to our car. And on the way, we saw some very talented boys playing the bagpipes, and these boys were just phenomenal. And it was just kind of cute to see them performing for a whole crowd and just giving it their best. Of course, we had to give them some change, and it's cool to encourage the arts and see the authentic art form of any place. Overall, one day was not nearly enough to check out everything that this beautiful historical city has to offer, but it was still worth it to go check out as much of the city as we can in the limited time that we had. Day 3 was Castle Day. This is the day that I was really looking forward to because ever since I was a kid I've been fascinated by castles. So while in Scotland, the notion of checking out some real castles from the 10th, 11th century, it was just very fascinating for me. So this day was dedicated to checking out some castles and eventually ending up at Loch Ness, which is way at the north of Scotland. So first off, we went for some breakfast, and again we went to a Caffe Nero at a mall near Edinburgh. And after getting a nice hearty breakfast, it was time to hit the road and drive up to the first castle, which was Doune Castle, a couple of hours away from Edinburgh. Today we're checking out Doune Castle first of all. It's a pretty old castle. It's from the 15th century, I believe 1406. This was ruled by the Duke and Duchess of Albany. This castle, like many other castles, had a military and strategic importance, the way they placed it, and of course all the observation towers and decks so that they can see the enemy coming and all that and get their guns ready, or whatever they had, cannons at the time. Also, the Duke of Albany, he used to live a pretty pimped out life, so he had feasts all the time, various kitchens, he had halls for entertaining guests, so this guy knew how to live it up at the same time. The castle was a little bit creepy and eerie, but it takes you back in time. It was a bit busy actually, surprisingly. A lot of people, so you can't even go up the stairs unless you're careful. There were also some cell rooms and some prison areas here, and there was also a trapdoor. So basically if you messed up, you just went down the trapdoor. This medieval times, people didn't really show a lot of mercy, I guess. But yeah, Doune Castle is the first one on the list, and we're gonna check out a few more today, hopefully. Good start to the day. As you can see, we spent a bit of time at Doune Castle and we did the tour, and being able to walk around there was just such a wonderful experience. Actually being in the castle and trying to relive what some other people went through hundreds of years ago. And after that, we decided to head to Drummond Castle, which was another hour or so away. So we're here at Drummond Castle and Gardens. Drummond Castle was built around 1490 by the Drummond family. A couple of hundred years later, these nice gardens were added, and these are supposed to be some of the finest terraced gardens in Scotland. Unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to do a proper tour of the castle because we're trying to do a lot of castles in one day, but I do like the vibe of this place. It's been renovated a few times, as you can see. It's not crumbling like the last castle that we checked out, and apparently there's someone who still uses the castle. It looks like more of a private castle. There's fewer tourists at this one. Yeah, it's a nice place. So one of the castles that I really wanted to see is called Doune Castle, and it's actually on the east coast of Scotland. So Doune Castle has a really striking appearance because it's on the edge of a cliff, and I've always wanted to go to this castle. But when we looked at the time, it just didn't seem possible to go all the way to Doune Castle and then make our way up to Loch Ness, because it was a couple of hours drive to Doune and then another 3 to 4 hours up to Loch Ness. So it just didn't make sense. So we decided to axe that Doune Castle and work our way up to Loch Ness because we had already seen a couple of castles. This ended up being about a 3-hour drive, and on this drive we got to really see the mountains of Scotland. Now Scotland is actually covered in mountains, and in fact some of the tallest mountains in the UK are to be found in Scotland. And on the way we passed by the southern uplands, the central lowlands, and finally the Highlands and Islands. These are the 3 different regions of mountains to be found in Scotland. When you get up to near Loch Ness, you see some of the highest mountains over there. There's definitely a lot of sheep in Scotland. I think we saw way more sheep than we did people on this drive up. By the end of the drive near Loch Ness, we were starting to get pretty tired because it was about 3.5 hours, and also getting a bit hungry. But then we finally got to Loch Ness and we saw this beautiful massive lake, 23 miles long. We were just driving right next to it and trying to get to a vantage point where we can get off and look for the Loch Ness monster. So this was the experience that we had been waiting for. Loch Ness is actually the largest loch in Scotland, judging by the volume of water that it has. It's not the longest loch in Scotland, but it is the deepest, so it ends up holding the most amount of water. And the interesting thing about it that you may not know is that it's actually not a lake. It's got some rivers that feed into it, and it's got some rivers that lead out of it. So it is being drained and filled. Not exactly a lake, but it is a loch. After driving alongside Loch Ness for a while, we pulled up on Urquhart Castle. This is an ancient castle that's laying in ruins, and unfortunately by the time we got to this castle, it was also closed and we were not able to check it out. So a bit of a streak of bad luck when it came to castles, because we got there at something like 4 o'clock or 4:15. They were still letting people in, but they were not selling tickets. Urquhart Castle was actually built back in the 13th century. and it played an important part in the Scottish Independent Wars. After that, it served as a royal castle for a while until the 17th century when it was destroyed in another war. In the 20th century, the government reopened it, and it's now one of the most popular tourist attractions in Scotland. This castle is protected by a drawbridge and a ditch, and it also has a 5-story observation tower. At this point, we really needed to get some dinner, so we decided to drive to Inverness, which is about 20 minutes away. Now, Inverness is another historical city, and this dates back to the 6th century AD. It's also the northernmost city in the United Kingdom. What's interesting about Inverness is that a poll rated it as the happiest place in the UK. I did feel a little bit of that happy vibe in Inverness. The people seemed pretty calm and chilled out, and the city itself was a mix of a lot of old ancient buildings and a few newer buildings, and in the middle of it is the Ness River, which of course flows through Loch Ness and comes through here, so it's quite possible that the Loch Ness monster comes down this river too sometimes. Near the River Ness, there is a castle known as Inverness Castle that sits on top of a hill. And this castle dates back to the 11th century, but it's been besieged, destroyed, and rebuilt many times. And this is the castle apparently where Macbeth killed the King of Scotland. That actual historical fact turned out to be the inspiration for obviously William Shakespeare's Macbeth, which a lot of us have read in high school or were made to read. For dinner, we went to an Indian restaurant known as Shapla Tandoori. This place is near the Ness River. It has that classic Indian restaurant vibe and it seems family friendly. We enjoyed some great views of the Ness River and the rest of the Inverness city from where we were seated. Now, the waiters at this restaurant were a little bit goofy because I called one of the waiters and I asked him for the ingredients in one of the dishes, and he just made a weird face and he walked away. So I think he didn't really know English, and later on I asked another guy about the ingredients in a dish and he just said, "What?" I thought that was a little bit rude. So they need to work on their service a little bit to smooth that out. For the entrees, the first thing we got was the chana masala, which is a chickpea Indian dish, as a lot of you guys may know. And it was well spiced, chickpeas were well cooked, but I would say it was a little bit on the sweet side. I preferred a little bit on the spicy side, and when it has a bit of a kick to it. The second dish we got was the paneer jalfrezi. Most of you guys probably know paneer is a type of cottage cheese. Paneer jalfrezi just has paneer with some green peppers and some chilies, but these guys made that dish super spicy, so it actually had sliced green chilies floating around in the curry, and the curry itself was spicy too. So overall, it had a real punch to it, and I really liked the dish, and the peppers were still crispy, the paneer was succulent and juicy. I should also mention that we got some roti, and this roti was actually made really different. It reminded me of a Jamaican roti, and most Indian restaurants don't make it this way. So the roti was quite large and it was a bit thick, but still soft and very easy to eat. So I liked the roti a lot and it went well with the dishes. Overall, a nice restaurant. After that, we actually decided to drive back to the Loch Ness and try our luck again in trying to find the Loch Ness monster. And this time we got lucky and we actually saw him 3 times. First time he was in a distance and you could see his head. The second time, we saw him floating around in the water and you could see a large dark shadow. And the third time, he actually photobombed us, so that was actually quite cheeky of the Loch Ness monster. But you know how Nessie is. When we were driving away from the lake, I saw him for a 4th time, and this time it was for real. I can't prove it because I didn't get a photo of it, but I was driving and I decided to just look at the lake, and I definitely saw a head sticking out. I wanted to pull over, but I couldn't because I was being tailgated by some British dude. So at that point, I decided to keep driving for a bit and then pull over. And then when we looked at the lake after that, we couldn't find Nessie at all. I guess he only reared his head for a little bit of time, but it was a nice goodbye present from Nessie and great experience overall going to the Loch Ness. At that point, it was time to start heading back to the hotel down near Edinburgh, so it was going to be a long drive. But before we started the drive, we decided to check out the Nessie gift shop. Now, these guys had Nessie-themed everything. They had Nessie candy, they had Nessie plush toys, all kinds of memorabilia, fridge magnets. So, you know, we had to pick up a little bit of that. And after the gift shop, it was time to make the drive. This was a very long drive, and we had to switch a couple of times just to be able to get to the hotel safely. And again, we made the mistake of driving too late in Scotland. Guys, this is a perilous place to drive after like 9 or 10 p.m. when it gets dark, because you know the roads are narrow, sometimes you're on the edge of the cliff, so I would not recommend that to anyone going to the UK. So try to plan out the day a little bit better so that you know you leave super early and try to hit up all the places before 4 or 5 p.m. when they start to shut down. And after that, you know, you can hit up a nice restaurant and then head home. So that's how we should have planned it, but at least we know for next time. Day 4 in the UK was all about checking out some Harry Potter locations and also making our way down from Scotland to London. So we decided to fuel up and hit another pub food type place in order to load up on some calories. We checked out of our hotel, Macdonald Houstoun House, and we made our way to another pub called Spylaw Tavern, which is in a little village called Colinton. This is a quaint and charming village, and I liked the exterior of the pub. It looked like an old brick house and it had a warm and inviting feel to it. The food was nice and hearty. First off, we got the garlic bread. The garlic bread was nice and cheesy. It came with a little bit of veggies. That was nice to get some vitamins on the side. The bread was warm and toasty and really well made, so no complaints about that. Next, we got the mac and cheese. The mac and cheese here was a little bit dense, especially compared to Deacon BRODIE'S Tavern. Flavors were right, but it's just a little heavy. And we also got the veggie burger. Now the veggie burger came with double rice and vegetable patties, and it also had mushrooms on top. And this had a smoky, almost meaty flavor to it. And it was just big and juicy, and it just made you feel so full. In fact, it made me feel a little bit sleepy, but it was a really good burger. We just got some Pepsi on the side, and I wish they served soft drinks like that over here in North America, because here they just give you a plain glass. I like these authentic Pepsi glasses. Overall, it was a pretty solid meal, and this is not a bad place to check out. The food is pretty good. After that, we began our drive to Alnwick Castle, which I was very excited to check out because this is the Harry Potter castle. You know, this is Hogwarts castle that they use in the films, so I've always wanted to go there and shoot a music video as well, so it was just twice as exciting. We began our drive. It was a couple of hours, and we actually drove along the North Sea coast. You know, it's very serene and nice, and it did start to rain a little bit, so it got a little bit bleak, but still the drive was enjoyable. And then we crossed the border, we got into England, and Alnwick Castle is basically near the England-Scotland border. So we got to this town called Alnwick, and the castle is one of the first things you see, and it's a beautiful castle. It's really well kept and maintained. This castle was actually built way back in the 11th century, but it's been renovated many times since, and currently it's the seat of the Duke of Northumberland. And that's why, you know, it's kept so nicely, because someone actually lives there, and it's also a major tourist attraction thanks in part to all the movies and shows that it's been in. Not just Harry Potter, but this castle has also been featured in Robin Hood, Elizabeth, Downton Abbey, and various other media. So because of that, it's a very high visibility place, and close to 1 million tourists go there every year. The town of Alnwick dates back almost to 600 AD, and it has various historical landmarks like towers, churches. Today it's more of a marketplace, and of course because of the castle it attracts a lot of visitors, so it's a visitor friendly town, and we enjoyed our time there, and we got some light snacks and coffee, and after that it was time to hit the road and make our way down to London. So we began the drive to London, and it was another 3 to 4 hours to get down there. There were a few roundabouts, lots of highways, and it's just a long drive, but very beautiful and enjoyable. And we took a slightly different way coming back down to London than we did going up to Scotland before, so we got to check out some new interesting scenery. It was just nice to drive on the English countryside and just be able to drive all over the UK, because that's something I've always wanted to do. Eventually later at night we got to London, and we stayed at the Aloft Hotel, which is near the London City Airport. Not to be confused with Heathrow Airport, which is on the west side of City. This is more on the east side, and it's just a beautiful futuristic looking hotel. I've never stayed at the Aloft Hotel before, although I have heard of it. They seem to have locations all over the world, and it's modern, the staff is casual and friendly, and the way they've done the decor is just really sleek and pleasing to the eye. There's all kinds of colors going on, but it's not overwhelming. You just feel like you stepped into the hotel of the future.